Tickets on sale now.
Lens Rentals versus Lenny's Rentals. Difference number 7.
At Lens Rentals, our goal is simple: share the best available equipment and educate and provide support to our customers to ensure they can achieve their goals, regardless of experience level.
Sharp, dedicated, focused. Just one more reason to use Lens Rentals. LensRentals.com. Shoot with the best.
Hello, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 8 of the Midwest Gaming Classic Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garris, panel director of the Midwest Gaming Classic. When Atari refused to give developers credit for their game designs, a number of programmers, including David Crane, broke away and started the first third-party video game company, Activision. Widely considered to have made some of the best 2600 games, joined programmers David Crane, Dan Kitchen, and Garry Kitchen as they discussed with Atari historian Marty Goldberg what it was like in the early days of this revolutionary company. What do you think about the company Activision has grown into today and their return to Atari 2600 programming with Audacity Games? And you know what? Enough of me talking. Why do we get to the podcast?
Are you going to say anything you've never said before?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming in. My name is Marty Goldberg. I'm one of the co-coordinators of the Atari Museum. I have the pleasure of presenting the co-founder of Activision, David Crane, and Garry and David Kitchen, who are also luminaries in the industry and came into Activision a short while later. We're going to talk about the early days of the industry and Activision. And I believe some a bit about Audacity Games too, their current project. And we're short on time, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it right over to them. Thank you.
Are we on? Is this mic on? Yes. It is. Very good. I have a big mouth. I usually don't need a mic, but I'll use it just in case. So the original name was the founding of Activision. Only one of the three of us up here actually founded Activision. So it would be a short talk and I'd be sitting in the audience. So we're not going to do that. So Dave, talk a little bit about the founding of Activision and then we'll move on from there.
Well, think of it as founding the retro gaming business that we all love so much. And then we're fine.
That's good.
I worked at Atari with Nolan Bushnell in 1977. And then Nolan sold the company, left the company, and became a less fun place to work. So some buddies of mine and I spun off, and we founded Activision. And at the very least, we were going to leave Atari and maybe just publish through Atari and make our own games. And we just decided, what the heck, let's go all the way and make our own development and publishing company. And in doing so, we created the first third-party publisher of video game cartridges. At the time, Atari made games for the Atari system, and Mattel made games for the Intellivision system, but Activision said, we didn't make a system, we don't own a game console. So we were able to do it for everybody. And I was at a GDC, 600 people in the audience, and I said, can I have a show of hands, who works for a third-party publisher? And it was everybody but the three guys in the back who work for Sony, because they have a console. But so third-party development and publishing is the way it became the norm. But anyway, so I was doing that on the West Coast, and Garry and Dan here were on the East Coast, and saw the opportunity to get into making video games as well.
Yeah, Dan and I were working for a little company that did electronics, microprocessor-based things like photographic timers or calculators. And we saw a Mattel game come out in 1975, Mattel Football, that had little white dashes, the same little dashes that made the number 8 on your watch. And we said, yeah, that's pretty cool. Same thing we do, only we're not making a game. Let's make a game. So we started playing with that technology. Ended up putting out a couple of games through Parker Brothers, Bank Shot and Wildfire. If you're a collector of electronic games, you may know those. Dan and I worked on those. I invented Bank Shot and have a patent on it, which is worth the piece of paper it's printed on. Then we saw that market start to crumble because some upstarts on the West Coast had launched a video game machine, and people would rather play on a TV than with little LEDs. I don't know why. To each their own, but you know. So I went to the boss at the time. We weren't the bosses of this company, and I said, we should be doing Atari games. And he said, go back to your desk. And then 3 months later, he had a company meeting and said, we should do Atari games. He was a visionary. So he told me to go buy an Atari and figure out how to do Atari games. So I went and bought it and spent about 6 months tearing it apart, ripping it open, umbilical cording it to my Apple II computer. And if it wasn't for the fact that the Apple II computer had a 6502 and the Atari computer had a 6502, without that coincidence, I'd be working in a car wash right now. But the fact that they both had the same processor made the whole thing a whole lot easier. So I was able to reverse engineer. Ironically, the first code I read in the Atari was this guy's code. It was actually Combat. I read the cartridges for Combat and started learning from what they were doing. And then Dan and I left the visionary and went off and joined the video game industry, called Activision because they were the best in the world. I mean, we knew it at the time.
Well, before that, you learned the system and created a game.
Oh yeah, that's right. I guess I did create a game before we called Activision. I learned the system, left the company, and then I got a call from some company that had, the Connecticut Leather Company.
Well, before that, you created a game.
Oh yeah, I did. That's true. For the visionary.
For the visionary,
yes, I did Space Jockey. Space Jockey was a fallout of the reverse engineering. That's what I was even thinking of it. You know, if you're going to reverse engineer and write something, you've got to make something. So I made Space Jockey. And everyone knows there's a bug in Space Jockey. We can talk about it on the Q&A if you want further details. So anyway, after that we left. Got a call from Coleco, Connecticut Leather Company, for you uninformed. And they had a license with Nintendo for Donkey Kong, and they needed to find someone who could program the Atari 2600 who didn't work for Activision or Atari. And there was only one person in the United States who could do that at that point. So I got the job. So I did that, and then we called.
You called?
Flew out to California and met with David and crew, and we idolized these guys because they were the best. And we knew it. And so we wanted to work with the best. So we went out and met with them, and we had a very, very strenuous meeting with Dave and Al Miller. Why don't you tell us about that meeting, Dave?
Yeah, we had a strenuous meeting. Well, see, we were fanboys. So in our little company in New Jersey, we had taken an Activision catalog in the back of boxing, and we had put our pictures of the pictures of Dave and Bob and Larry and Al.
You remember the one that had the catalog?
And Gary
had
said, we're going to be those guys. It was myself, Gary, John Van Ryzen at the time, who ended up doing Hero, and another chap who didn't work with us any longer after a few months. So we met with Activision. We went out there. We were fanboys, Googling at the car that came back from lunch with David and Al and Bob and Larry. And we had a meeting with the president, vice president, and David Crane and Al Miller in their conference room. And Al had just finished ice hockey, which was running on an Atari VCS on the conference room table, and Gary said to me, "Dan, you're pretty good at it," and looked at Al and said, "Why don't you play Dan?"
And Al took the controller and slid it over and said, "Dan, you want to play?"
And so I was sweating playing Al Miller at the game he had just released, which was phenomenal. And fortunately, I had a little inside shot around the back of the net that I did, and Al kind of looked at it and said, "How the hell did you do that?"
He had never seen that shot. He said,
So I ended up,
"What was that?"
I ended up beating him hands down at his own game in the conference room during the meeting.
And we got the job.
And we got the job.
That certainly helped. But, it's funny, those of us who made those games, we were the world record holders until we released the game. And it was only about a week before somebody figured out a different way to play the game than we intended. I mean, I designed Pitfall to run from left to right. And I did that very carefully. I wanted to teach you, I wanted to let you learn the simple lessons, and then before you get to the harder screens, and you practice running and jumping and climbing and all that. And then somebody just realized, if you run to the left, if you die on an obstacle, you are reborn past the obstacle instead of having to redo the obstacle. Yeah, that's pretty easy decision once you realize that. But yeah, so Al Miller thought he was the best ice hockey player at the time, and he had actually
Which he
been
was the
the
best.
week before.
Yes. That's right.
So we ended up talking to Activision, we ended up talking to Atari, and we decided to go with Activision. Because we liked these guys, and we thought their games were great, and Atari was really doing some not so good stuff at that moment in time. And so we decided to go with Activision. We opened up an Eastern Design Center. It was the four of us in about 3,000 square feet of space. Had plenty of room for expansion. And that's where I did Keystone Capers, in that office, and Dan did Crackpots. And I guess that's where John did Hero.
John did Hero.
And Gary left out one small step in there where he had to figure out how to get Activision's attention to be able to even be considered. And so he cold called. He just called the main switchboard and said, "I want to talk to development, software development." Well, we didn't talk to people. We were locked behind a desk, behind a wall.
With a key card.
Because it was all secret.
Yeah.
What we were developing was all secret. We had a lot of competitors out there at the time. And he finally got connected to our vice president of product development, who was the administrator who would keep us in sodas. I mean, it's kind of his job. So Gary calls him and gets him on the phone, and he said, "I make 2,600 games." And Tom said, "No, you don't." The only people who make 2,600 games are Atari and Activision, And he said, "Well, I'm just finishing up Donkey Kong for Coleco." And Tom says, "We'll be out tomorrow."
Yes, we
And
want to
he-
see
he
your
and-
facilities.
He and our CEO flew out that next day because we were trying to expand. How do you find people to make these games? It was very challenging to make these, I have to tell you.
Yeah.
Talk to some of the homebrew guys and see what they go through just to put something on the screen.
So here we have these two big executives coming out, and we're working in the basement of my 1,500 square foot house in Milford, New Jersey, and the basement's unfinished. So if you know what an unfinished basement is, there's pipes everywhere, got to duct down. I mean, it's really...
Didn't the meter reader come
Well,
in the middle of that meeting?
Yes. So we get it as clean as we can.
Yeah, well, Gary looks at me when he gets off the phone and said, "They want to come see our facilities." I said, "What, they want to see our toilet?"
So we clean up as much as we can. They come. We've got it as good as we can. Looks great. We've put all sorts of fake stuff around. Looks like we know what we're doing. We have tools and everything. And then in the middle of meeting with them, showing them some prototypes of things we're working on, the doorbell rings. And I go up and it's the meter man. And he says, "I got to come down and read the meter in the basement." I said, "You can't." He said, "I have to. I got to go down." He pushes by me and goes down right in the middle of the meeting, tells Levy to get out of the way. He's blocking the meter.
We're discussing our future with the biggest company in the
Jim
video
Levy,
game
the head of
business
the
right now.
$250 million company, had to help us pick up a 80-pound wooden desk to move it so that we could read the meter.
So you can read the meter. That was just wonderful. that was a great meeting. And then we did end up settling on Activision, and I've worked with David Crane ever since June of 1982, except for a 2-year period, I think, where Dave worked with Hasbro toys. But I worked with him the entire time since then to now. So we can pretty much finish each other's sentences and finish each other's code. So, it works both ways.
Yeah.
Dan has been with us on and off. He had a job at Majesco for a number of years.
Yes, I went off and did some other work in the game industry, game producing, business development, licensing, that sort of thing. But you're talking about some of the interesting stories about Pitfall, right and left. David created the entire game Pitfall to be played with one life, and just added the other 2 at the very end.
Because his compatriots told him he was nuts.
I was a purist. I said, you go till you die. It's life.
Tell them the story, Dave, about Decathlon, about how important it is to never release a game with bugs.
You mean to find all the bugs?
Today, every game company releases with hundreds of bugs. They're a bunch of wusses. You're supposed to release with no bugs. And that's the way we do it at Activision. No bugs. Except for one time.
Well, I had just finished Decathlon, and we were hosting a Make-A-Wish kid. So here's a young child who is terminally ill, and he said his wish is to visit the game designers at Activision, go behind the scenes, see what's going on there. And so they came with TV cameras and crews and such, and we set him up and gave him Decathlon. It was the first non-employee to play the game Decathlon.
Wasn't like Today's Show or CBS or somebody?
Well, it's just, all the cameras and lights and anyway, so he's playing, and he's trying to play this game, and yet they keep asking him questions. How cool is it to be here at Activision, And so he's half distracted, and he's doing the pole vault. And I'm sitting there, behind him on camera as well. And I'm watching him play, and as he's distractedly answering this question, he starts pressing the button to pole vault. And you have to run real fast, then you press the button to plant it, and then you press it again to release. And what he just did is he got distracted and he started pressing the button repeatedly. And the little pole vaulter started going higher and higher and higher and higher and higher.
Right off the top of the screen.
Right off the top of the screen. While I'm on camera watching this happen. So I play poker now because I guess I developed a poker face back then. So I said, at that I said, young Matthew, he needs a break. Give me let's take 5. When I went to the manufacturing lead at the company and said, hold the presses. We are not having a million of these made with that bug in it. But you couldn't revise a ROM. A ROM is a ROM, for God's sake. And so we tried really hard to get the bugs out, and sometimes we missed 1 or 2. There was a bug in Laser Blast where, when I figured it out, 1 bit out of the 16,384 bits in the ROM needed to be a 1 instead of a 0. And, you miss a few things occasionally.
Yeah,
What was the bug? Do you recall?
I don't even remember what the bug was.
So usually our best stories come from people asking questions. So unless anybody would like to hear something specific, why don't we start taking some questions from the audience? Go ahead, back there.
So, did you have any bug testers at all when you were developing games?
It's a great question.
Well, in those really early days, first of all, you know what the game development team was? 1 person. All right, so all those 2,600 games that you played were made by 1 person. Each one of us did every pixel of art, every sound effect, every line of code, and all the testing, and had to tell the manual writers what the game did. We practically wrote the manuals ourselves. So there was not a division that was called Game Tester for a long time. But we had, and 4 of us on the West Coast and 4 of them on the East Coast, and we designed the facility as a bullpen, cubicles surrounding a center open area, so that when you were busy working, you would be hunched down over your computer and people would know not to bother you. But periodically you would then roll back on your chair and start to play the game, to play test what you just did. And that's when they knew they could come in and kibitz. So everybody kibitzed on everybody's game, and then whoever was not working on a game at the exact moment would pick them up and play test it. And so everybody got to say whether they liked the game, whether they needed, it was too hard, too easy, and that's where most of the bugs were discovered.
Except if it was Dave's game, then everybody was terrified. Right, Dave?
Who, me?
You don't go over to Dave and go, Dave, your game sucks. I just want to tell you that, That didn't happen.
I think I worked on something, somebody worked on something with Dave once. And I think Dave's comment was, I like everything you did, but take all the creative stuff out.
And we, to this day, have not figured out what game that was.
Well, that wasn't a game. That was the Activision logo.
Is that what? No, was it really?
It was when you guys added the colors to it.
Oh, the rainbow. No?
No, I don't think
You guys added the rainbow to it, but you added it just as a little
Yes, as a
rectangle.
square.
Yes, but
And it came back to the West Coast, and
And
we
they
turned
made
it,
it
we
tilted.
turned it into that
right, the
swoopy.
flying thing. Yes.
Because the earliest games had the Activision logo, but did not have a rainbow.
Right, we had the rainbow. The East Coast. Yes.
Sure. When you think about, you've all had very long and diverse careers in the video game industry. Are there any moments outside of sort of the Atari 2600 era that you're really proud of, and any that you wish you could do over again, like Camp Deadly? Will we ever see little computer people again?
That's a lot of questions.
Well,
What people don't realize is behind the scenes in game development in those days, a new console would come out about every 2 years. And if you wanted to stay in the publishing business, you had to start porting your games over or even doing original work on a new console. But that was a lot of work that you didn't get to see. We had to build hardware development systems so that we could tweak the pixels. We had to do sound effects drivers, music drivers, data compressors, codecs, compressors, decompressors, things that ran on the console.
switched to all new tools if the processor or the language was different.
Yeah, different CPU, different language. And so we had to go back to the drawing board for months before we could do our first real work on a new console. So every time a new console came out, it was a challenge. And there were some really strange bugs that came out of things like the Commodore 64 and the Super Nintendo that eventually they started telling us how to make these games. I mean, I reverse engineered the Intellivision before we could put games on the Intellivision. So that was that entire effort of that. So yeah, the fact that, I published games on 25 different consoles in 40 years. And that counts, Brew, Symbian, these are the earliest smartphones that weren't even very smart, and you add all those up, and every time you had to start from scratch and build all these new tools. So that was a big deal. Little Computer People, had a lot of fun with Little Computer People, had a lot of design, a lot of plans for its future. It did not do well enough financially to breed a sequel. So that's really where that died. Otherwise, we were about to have an entire apartment complex where your little computer person would knock on the door of the next door neighbor computer person, and everybody would interact. And
I do have a story about the moment where you and I came to the conclusion that we were at the lowest point. But I don't know if I should tell it.
Well, we started a business in 1995 called Skyworks Technologies, where we said, all these consoles come out, let's treat the internet as a new game console. And if you guys don't remember, in 1995, people were afraid to put their credit cards online. My money's going to be stolen. So there was no business model to sell games on the internet in any way. So we created what ended up getting called advergaming. It was named after we had done this. And the idea was a three-way partnership. We're going to make the games. We're going to go to an advertiser who wants to have games on their site, and then that's going to draw in players who play for free, get to be advertised to by this guy, and we get paid to make the games. It's a three-way partnership to turn it into something where we could actually make money.
And it worked.
It worked.
And we established ourselves without anybody knowing who we were and what our background was as the number one deliverer of games like that in the country. I mean, name a major brand and they were a client. Ford, Toyota, BMW, McDonald's, Pepsi, just right down the line. Well, one of the brands...
But those games were being played 80 million plays a month.
Yeah, I went to a meeting with Pepsi and we were bidding on a project and the woman said to me, well, I don't know. We did a game with Wild Tangent, who was one of our competitors, and they said, that Wild Tangent game last month, that was played 20,000 times. She was very proud. And I said, yeah, so we did a website called The Candy Stand for lifesavers that had free games on it, including mini golf. Everybody may have played mini golf, but a Candy Stand was huge. And I said, those games were played 1 billion times a year. And that shut up. And we ended up doing the project. So anyway, sometimes we would get very odd clients. A lot of clients were really exactly what you would expect. I mean, doing games for lifesavers or doing games for any brand that marketed to kids. That was all, we did a lot of work with ESPN, CBS Sports. But we ended up getting a project with
a pharmaceutical company.
A pharmaceutical company.
Oh, okay.
And we ended up getting a very good pharmaceutical company. And this was a point in time where we were doing fine, but you didn't turn the work down. I mean, you didn't go, oh, I'm not going to do that work. They had big money and they were willing to pay. And Dave's name came up when we put the ping pong balls in the thing and drew a ball out, and it was Dave. And I said, Dave, you got to do a game for the pharmaceutical company. So they sent us a spec on what game they wanted, and Dave, you did a great job on that.
I did a very good job on it. The product was called Zelnorm.
You can look it up.
And it was an
diarrhea
medicine.
And they wanted a game that was like Asteroids.
Because if you shot at the asteroid, this was a piece of poop breaking up in your system into smaller, more manageable.
And you were shooting Zelnorm at it.
Yeah.
Right? So one night, it was 11 o'clock at night, and I'm on the phone with Dave, and we have to give a new version to the client tomorrow, and we're talking about the game on the phone. And it's silence on the line, and Dave goes, has my career really come to this? And I think I almost died right at that moment. We didn't do any more work for pharmaceuticals after that one.
Literally, they wanted us to do a shitty game.
Over there.
So, in the early days, the games were one man building it somewhat simple in some ways. What was the progression like to get just massive teams of folks with very focused disciplines building games?
Well, it was really pretty simple. I could draw pixel art, but I'm not an artist. And as the industry started to grow, pixel artists became a thing. People actually came in. I'm a pixel artist. I want a job. And sound effects and music composition and arrangement. And so as long as the projects got bigger and bigger, you'd look for a specialist who could do basically what we were doing at the time in one brain, but the specialists were better at that one thing, and so now you have a team of 5 or a team of 7. It obviously got insane when there's teams of thousands. We don't like those kinds of games, which is why we're out there at Audacity Games making Atari 2600 games again, because we have a lot of fun making these small teams, working with small teams.
A very funny story, I'm sure you've all heard of and played a game called Call of Duty. That was really responsible for the talents of Glenn Schofield, who's an amazing creator. Glenn was hired by us in the late 80s as a pixel artist. He was one of the guys we brought on as a pixel artist who had a great flair to do art and other things, and went on to make a massive career creating and supporting the Call of Duty brand. But as Dave said, there were people who came in with lots of talents for art, and when we got to the point where one guy couldn't do it, we needed an artist, or we needed somebody to do the audio, the music. That's really what started the teams, and then the games got a little bigger, and we had a programmer to do the main game and a programmer to do all the ancillary separate little screens you saw. The menu screen, the game over screen. So we slowly grew from there.
It was a slow evolutionary process, somewhat insidious, in fact, because it just kept making the teams bigger and bigger until it wasn't fun anymore.
There's another word for it. You could call it a deterioration of the industry. I don't want to join the video game industry if I'm going to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for a year on the friction coefficient of a tire in a driving game. I mean, it just doesn't turn me on, you know? So that's why we never really got involved in the 500 to 1,000 people games. And we like to be in control of our games.
But in the small teams, it's actually not bad.
No,
because
small team, 5, 10 people,
you take
absolutely
someone
fine.
with our experience of having done everything, and then put that person, managing the process. I know what that art should be. They're going to make better looking art than me, but I'm going to know when it's right because I've done it myself.
Right.
It's kind of like George Lucas or whatever. They can sit behind the camera, but they don't. They can do all these things, but they don't. They just manage the entire process.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us went from there, from the original Atari, NES, Super Nintendo days, at least I did, to more production work, managing teams, because, as a programmer, I knew how things worked. So if I'm managing a team of programmers and artists, I know how to code it, so we kind of become the chap who's orchestrating who's running the orchestra, the maestro, as it were, and doing it with multiple teams at once. And that's kind of where some of our careers expanded. But we're very happy to be coming back to our roots, to actually creating these games. And on that note, maybe Dave and Gary can start with the formation of Audacity.
Well, we were taking questions.
I'm sorry.
We skipped out.
Yes.
Go ahead.
At the beginning of all this, the number of people that had these skills was pretty small, right?
Yeah, it was pretty tiny.
Sort of an incestuous world. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there ever a legal challenge regarding, hey, you can't make a cartridge for our system?
Hey, David. Of course there was.
Yeah, when we spun out of Atari sued us for all sorts of evil things that we didn't do. And the net result is that if you have a skill, it's in your brain. And you can go practice your art anywhere. And it helps to be in California because you can't even have a non-compete agreement, when you leave a company.
Yeah, legally in
California.
California, you can't even have somebody sign non-compete. And what's important to understand about that is that Atari, given how early it was, they didn't engineer any lockout. They quickly learned that they could sue these guys saying they took confidential information or whatever, and they lost. Not these guys lost, Atari lost, or they settled, but it was never a valid claim. But when Nintendo came in, when Atari crashed, first thing they did is come in with a lockout. And the lockout was based on a patent. So they had a patented chip that spoke to another patented chip in the system. The two said hi to each other, did a handshake, and if you didn't have those two patented chips, you couldn't talk to the machine, you couldn't write for the machine. So Nintendo realized you gotta have more than just, you're not allowed to work on our machine, you gotta have something we could sue you for. So from that point forward, that's the way it's been. But Atari didn't have that, so there was really no way to stop it.
I know that one of the reasons that a lot of video game manufacturers, including Atari, did not want to credit their developers was they were afraid of their staff being poached. But here's Activision with your guys' names all over the product. Did you find other companies trying to take you away from Activision?
No, that wasn't a worry. I mean, we founded the company. We were, founding shareholders, stakeholders, so that was not going to be tough for us. But it was a founding principle. The CEO that we chose, we were 4 technical guys, and we found a CEO guy to make. So it was really 5 of us started Activision, and he was from the record business, and he really said, I have something I can promote here. So we were kind of promoted like rock stars or whatever. But what we saw it was a creative work like the author of a book. You should credit the author for a creative work. Simple as that. It was a founding principle of Activision, and we stuck to it. And people started to copy it, which is fine, duplicating the same thing. I thought it was a good idea. Then the teams got too big. So when you have 100 or 500 people on a project, most of my games said David Crane's such and such. And
the titles got too long with all the names.
There wasn't one guy that was in charge of the overall, vision, feel of the game.
Vision. I mean, I think that's really sad that we're doing it at Audacity, and we're the only vestige left of what Activision started. I mean, Dan said Call of Duty. Yeah, it was Glenn Schofield at one point, but it was somebody else before him. Does anybody know who was the original creator of? No, nobody knows. Does anybody know who the original creator of Medal of Honor was? Because Call of Duty was really very much based on Medal of Honor. It was the team that left EA. Sure. So you don't know any of that because they don't have any respect for the creative people who do this stuff. So, but we do.
Yeah, I mean, they think rolling the credits is enough. But if you watch and look in the movie business, you'll still see, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. I mean, there's at least somebody in charge, and the video game business went a different direction.
Yep. Over there.
Just a little bit of a further back question, more of kind of a. So I'm wondering, growing up, born mid 50s, right? How did you get into basically the electronic industry, considering how early it was at that stage? I mean, when you were a teenager, what were your interests? How did you end up making it into becoming a programmer?
Well, I'll start since I'm the oldest. It turns out I was always a video game or a game designer. If a new board game came out and neighborhood kids wanted to play it, but it was a game for 4 and we only had 3, you open the box, the rules were on the inside of the box. Remember those days? And I would read it through and I would rewrite the rules so that we could do it with 3 people. So I was designing games when I was in grade school. Another interesting thing is if you're going to have one person do these kinds of games, it's very much both a left and a right brain process. It's very, very, very technical, but it also has to be very creative and artistic and all of those things. So I was a techie. I mean, I had the erector set, and I had the chemistry set, and I had all the things that I was making. I tore apart a television when I was 12. And I did all that stuff, but my mother was an artist in 17 different medium. I mean, she was watercolor, oil, palette brush, all these things that she did. And she forced her kids to take watercolor classes. So I was trained as an artist as well. So I had both left and right brain stuff going on. And when you look at the people who were successful in these early days, that's what you see. You see both left and right brain personalities showing up in the same place. So besides the fact that I had an interest in how games worked and had art training, but was a techie through and through, it's kind of like, where else would I go? What else would I do,
And he was wicked smart.
Did your parents ever forgive you for what happened to the house when you tore up that TV?
That TV was a gift to me. And there was long before there were such things as remote controls. So what I had done is I had put the TV up in a cabinet and I had torn it apart to try to run controls down to the bedside.
Ah, there we go.
Okay. Well, they're not designed to have a 40 or 20-foot cable carrying RF. I didn't know anything about RF at the time, right? So it's a wire, make it longer. Yeah, I'm not sure if it ever worked again.
So my background, as Dave says, it's one of our similarities. My background was art. Only my background was almost purely art. I was drawing and painting since I was a little kid. My dad was not an artist by profession, but he got me into it. So when I went to college, I went for art. But then I got a part-time job to pay my college tuition at an electronics company, got dragged into the frenzy that a 4-person company can become very quickly. And I went to my guidance counselor and I said, look, I'm learning electronics at this job. I'm going to switch to engineering. And he said, people don't switch from art to engineering. Are you crazy? So I did it anyway. But I've always benefited from having the art background. So.
Yeah, and our dad was always into electronics. He would build TVs. He had one of the first TVs working in Canada in the 40s. He would make TVs. He would have
crystal radios,
tube testers around the house, and make anything electronics. He learned from NP. I forget what it was. It was a NRI book club that he got, and he got
National Radio Institute.
Yeah, he got us interested in electronics, and so when Gary went into the electronic company, I wanted to kind of follow him, and I went in and worked with him as well.
How are we doing on time?
About 8 minutes left.
8 minutes left.
Back there. Yep.
Gary, this question is more for you. How frustrating is it for you when you were working for Coleco? Because I know that you had to do Donkey Kong on a deadline, right?
Yep.
How frustrating was it for you that years later everyone said, oh, Coleco intentionally hamstrung Atari games to make them look better on ColecoVision than Atari?
I never heard that. Yes, that's that famous truth, which everyone knows unequivocally that I ruined that game just so the ColecoVision game could look so much better. Now, my first question is, if you knew the difference between the hardware of the ColecoVision and the Atari, and nothing I had to do to make the Atari version look less than the ColecoVision. You know, I mean, give me a break. No, it's absolutely not true. And all you have to do is look at the financials. Honestly, I think my Atari cartridge, 4,096, a list of 4,096 numbers. Imagine that. Just take a list of 4,096 numbers. Fits on 1 page or 2 pages of a Word document. That generated over $100 million for Coleco. 25% of their total revenue as a company. They had 570 products on the market. That list of numbers generated 1/5 of their revenue that year. Who would screw around with that and say, no, make it crap. We don't want that money. They were going to sell every unit they could, and they knew how big the property was, and I never had a conversation with them about making it bad. I made it as good as I could. The limiting factor on that cartridge was simply the fact of when they signed the deal with in Nintendo. The day they signed the deal with Nintendo, they got on the phone and called the only person in the world who was available to write the game. As soon as I started working on the game, I only had 90 days before it was going to go into manufacturing and make like a September ship. Now, that was it. I don't care if you tell me you can have 128K ROM instead of 4K. I couldn't do anything more in the time I had.
Well, and on top of that, you never had a discussion with them to dumb it down, but you did have a discussion to say, I could do 2 more levels if I just went to the 8K ROM.
And had an extra couple of
An
months.
extra couple of months. And they said, you want us to delay by a couple of months.
Miss Christmas.
Miss Christmas.
And
Increase
increase the
our
price.
cost by, $1 or $2, whatever it would be to make the more expensive ROM at that time. And we're going to sell every one of the 4K ones you ever make.
Right.
You want us to do what? Really?
Yeah, what businessman would make that decision? Yeah. Oh, I'm going to skip Christmas so that 25 years from now, people don't yell at you at retro shows and tell you that the game sucks. I don't think they care about that.
40 years from now.
So, it is what it is. It's the best, as Howard Scott Warshaw says, in my case, it's the best 90-day game you ever saw.
I'm curious about your time at Majesco. What years were you there?
1999 to 2006.
So you were there for the Psychonauts.
Yes, I worked with Tim Schafer and produced Psychonauts with him. That was amazing. Tim's an amazing creative guy, and we got to work very close, and it was just awesome to be with him.
Well, I also have to tell you, Tim Schafer is a big Audacity Games fan. Every time we have our first day of orders when a game comes out, inevitably he's ordered a game.
He's on that VIP list.
He's on the VIP list as soon as the VIPs are ordered. I look at, because I know approximately where he lives, I look and go, oh, Tim Schafer bought another game. And I ran into him at a show and he confirmed it. Big fan. Last row.
What makes the 2600 so satisfying to work with? You guys have returned it several times now.
What makes that so satisfying, Dave?
I think we're masochists. It is so challenging that it has to be equally rewarding when you actually go through all that and make something as good as what we can make. Tremendously rewarding.
And honestly, look, if you knew something that you were better at than anybody in the world, wouldn't you do it? Right? Look, I could write PlayStation games. There's 400 people probably within 100 miles of here who's better than I am. But nobody can write the 2600 like the three of us. So we do what we're good at, and we enjoy it. And you guys enjoy it. God help it. Hey, it's great that you enjoy it, because if I was the best in the world at something and nobody enjoyed it, it wouldn't be very gratifying. But the fact that you guys love it, and we do it, and we know we're good at it, why would we do anything else?
Yeah.
How's our time?
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming in and telling these wonderful stories that everybody definitely enjoyed. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And if you want to see them, the table is right in the vending hall on the third floor there. Thanks again. And I believe the next talk is Walter Day from Galaxy. So thank you. And
Thank you so much.
If you want to come talk to us, or you want us to sign one of our old games or whatever, we're at our booth for the rest of today and tomorrow. Just come by.
And that's the end of this podcast episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, hearing stories from back in the day at Activision from David Crane, Dan Kitchen, Garry Kitchen, and Atari historian Marty Goldberg, and hearing about new things that are going on at their new company, Audacity Games. We love having them at the show. They have been at the show several times over the years, and we hope to see more of them. And until next time, take care, stay safe, and game on.